Imagine for a moment if somebody wrote the Bible with your blood. Well, that's exactly what happened to this demonically possessed nun. This isn't just some fictional tale pulled from the pages of a religious text. This actually happened to a real live person who survived the encounter and lived to tell the tale. Sister Gertrude Mary Morgan was a Catholic nun living in New York in the early 1940s when she became the focus of a horrifying demonic possession case that made headlines around the world. It all started one night when she was alone in her room, writing as she was frequently known to do. But what she was writing was far from the normal journal entries one might expect from a devout religious woman. No, she was writing the words of a demon named Asmodeus, who had forced her hand to write his scripture. The demon loomed over her, threatening to snatch her soul unless she obeyed him completely. And somehow she managed to write down everything he said, which included blasphemous statements directly contradicting the teachings of the Bible. Asmodeus continued to torment the nun, forcing her to write day and night until her hands were covered in blood. Yes, blood. She didn't have any cuts or injuries, but the blood just oozed out of her skin as if it were a part of some ghastly horror movie. And after several days of non-stop writing, the nun passed out from exhaustion, at which point the demon finished his scripture, dipped his quill in the nun's blood, and wrote his final words on the page. He then promptly ripped the pages from the notebook and flung them across the room, scattering them across the floor like some kind of sick, twisted confetti. Although terrified and physically drained, the nun was still able to make the sign of the cross and say a prayer before passing out. When she came to, she called out for help and was taken to see the church's handyman, who administered last rites, presumably believing that the nun was near death. But against all odds, the nun survived the demonic possession and the attack of the crazed demon Asmodeus. And although she was no longer in danger, that wasn't the end of the story, because what happened next was even more shocking. After recovering from the physical ordeal, Sister Gertrude found herself the target of ridicule and disbelief from both the public and many members of the clergy. Even after showing the bloodied pages from her notebook, nobody believed her story, which only added to her distress and made her feel as though she were losing her mind. But there was one person who believed her, Father Albert Hughes, the same priest who had previously baptized her, and together they decided to take the case to the Vatican in hopes that they could prove once and for all that the nun was telling the truth. But the higher-ups didn't want to hear it. They believed that Sister Gertrude was either making the whole thing up or had simply been possessed by a demon who was now pretending to be an angel. The nun and the priest were both suspended from the church, cut off from their former lives and left to fend for themselves. With nowhere else to turn, the two went public, holding a press conference and showing the world the bloody pages from the nun's journal. And for a moment, it seemed as though they might be vindicated. The story gained enough traction that the local newspaper ran a front-page article about it, complete with pictures of the possessed nun and the bloodied manuscript. But soon enough, the higher-ups at the Vatican had the article removed from circulation, and the case was once again put under wraps. What happened to Sister Gertrude and Father Hughes after that remains a mystery, but we can assume that they spent the rest of their lives trying to prove that demons do indeed exist. Now, do you believe the story of Sister Gertrude? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about demonic possessions, stay tuned. Next up, we've got a wild tale about a church where every nun was screaming, but it wasn't their voices. Something sinister had taken over. It all started with an innocent painting. The nuns had found it in the attic of the old church, and it was one of their favorite new additions to the chapel. No one knew who painted it or what it was even called, but the painting itself seemed to glow from within. It was like the light from the candles in front of it, but it was coming from behind the canvas. One day, while cleaning the painting, Sister Angela noticed something odd. Behind the canvas, there were some writings no one could understand. And when she tried to wipe them off, they kept reappearing, as if written by some supernatural entity. Soon, all the nuns of the church gathered in the chapel to see this strange occurrence for themselves. They were trying to figure out what the message was when suddenly the painting started to shake. The nuns screamed and fell to their knees, praying for forgiveness for whatever sin they had committed. But it wasn't their prayers that stopped the shaking. It was Father Michael. He stepped forward, took a deep breath, and shouted, "In the name of God, be gone, demon," and he exorcised the painting. But as soon as he uttered those words, the painting started glowing even brighter than before. And then a voice echoed through the chapel. It wasn't any of the nuns, but it sounded like it was coming from behind the painting. "You foolish mortals," the voice said. "Do you really think you can trap me here forever? I am beyond your comprehension. I have been here since before you came, and I will stay here long after you are gone." And just like that, the voice stopped. The painting went back to normal, and the glow faded away. The father didn't know what to do, so he decided to cover the painting again. He thought that would stop whatever was inside from coming out, but he was wrong. That night, all the nuns were awoken from their sleep by screams. They ran to the chapel, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The painting was destroyed, and on the wall behind it, the words, "I am Legion," were written in blood. This time, the father knew he needed help. So he called the bishop, and together they decided to perform an exorcism on the painting. But this time, things got even crazier. The painting started levitating above the ground, and the eyes on the canvas started glowing red. Then the painting moved towards the priest and the bishop and hovered right above them. The two men were terrified, but they continued the exorcism. And finally, after what felt like hours, the painting fell back to the ground, crashing into pieces on the floor. As the dust settled, the two men looked at each other. They were both shocked, but relieved that whatever was inside the painting was finally gone. Or so they thought. A few days later, the bishop was giving a sermon in the church when he noticed something. All around him, the faces of the congregation were twisted in horrible ways. Their eyes glowed red, and their mouths were wide open as if they were screaming. But when he looked closer, he realized that none of them were actually making a sound. He turned to leave, but as he did, he heard a voice in his head. "Don't go," it said. "Don't go," it repeated, and then the voice echoed through the church, getting louder and louder until it was a deafening roar. "Don't go, don't go, don't go." And then the demon screamed through every nun's mouth at once. The bishop fell to his knees, covering his ears. He had never heard such a horrible sound. The demon was using the nuns as vessels, and it was driving him insane. But then he remembered what he had learned during his exorcism training. He slowly stood up, walked up to the nearest nun, and started reading the prayer for the exorcism of a demon. As he did, the screaming stopped and the nun's eyes slowly regained their focus. The bishop continued the prayer, and as he did, more and more nuns regained control over their bodies. After what felt like an eternity, the last nun collapsed on the ground, freeing the last of the demon's voices from her throat. The bishop was exhausted, but he knew this wasn't over yet. He could still feel the demon's presence in the church, but now it was weaker than ever. With the remaining strength, he grabbed the holy water and started sprinkling it around the church. As he did, he could feel the demon getting weaker and weaker until finally it was gone. The church was silent. The only sound was the wind blowing through the trees outside. The bishop looked around him and saw that all the nuns were okay. They had no memory of what happened, but they were safe. And that is why, my friend, whenever you see a painting that seems to glow from within, don't touch it, for you never know what kind of demons it might contain. Next up, let's dive into the wild tale of the demon nun turning holy water into boiling blood. The demon nun, a terrifying thought indeed. Now imagine this. You're in a church and you look up at the altar where the priest is about to perform an exorcism. The priest is valiant but outmatched by the demon who possesses the young girl. And then, from the depths of hell itself, the demon lunges at the priest, knocking him back. And as the demon nun takes her revenge on the living, she accidentally knocks over a cruet of holy water. That was no ordinary vial of holy water. It was enchanted by a powerful priest just before his death. And now, as the blood from the wound on the demon nun's leg hits that holy water, it begins to boil. and spit and hiss as if something unholy has just been cast into it. What happens next will make your blood run cold. The church was filled with the sounds of tormented screams as Father Bennett fought valiantly against the demon that had possessed young Susie. The demon, with its unholy laughter, echoed through the old church, taunted the priest, finding amusement in his futile attempts to banish it. "You cannot defeat me, mortal," the demon snarled, its voice dripping with malice. "I am Legion, and I am beyond your pathetic exorcism." With a surge of power, the demon lunged at the priest, knocking him off balance and sending the silver cross that he held crashing to the ground. For a moment, Father Bennett felt a surge of fear, but he quickly shook it off. He had dedicated his life to God, and he would not be deterred. Taking a deep breath, he continued the exorcism, his voice echoing with newfound determination. "Begone, foul creature," he commanded, "and never return." The demon snarled, but before it could respond, Father Bennett felt a sudden change in the room. The air grew cold, and he could feel the demon's presence suddenly become weaker. Hope surged through him. Was it possible that he was winning? But then, as quickly as it had started, the change was gone. The demon was once again taunting him, its voice echoing with renewed strength. "You are a fool," it sneered, "to think you can defeat me. I am too powerful. You will lose." And with that, the demon lunged at the priest once again, knocking him back. And in that moment, the demon nun took her revenge. The fight between Father Bennett and the demon nun raged on, each blow from the demon shaking the very foundation of the old church. But as the battle reached its climax, the demon nun made a fatal mistake. In her rage, she lunged at the priest, accidentally knocking over a small cruet of holy water that sat on the altar. The water splashed onto the floor, forming a small pool at the demon nun's feet. She paused, momentarily stunned by the unintended consequence of her actions. But before she could recover, the priest, with a sudden surge of strength, grabbed a wooden stake and lunged at the demon, driving the stake deep into her chest. As the stake connected with the demon nun's flesh, a plume of black smoke erupted from the wound, and the demon screamed in agony. "No!" the demon shrieked, its voice echoing with pain and hatred. "You cannot kill me." But Father Bennett ignored the demon's pleas, pulling the stake free and readying himself for the final blow. As the smoke cleared, revealing the demon nun's terrified face, the priest knew that the battle was won. With a final prayer on his lips, Father Bennett drove the stake into the demon nun's heart. And with that, the demon within her let out one final scream before going silent. But the story doesn't end there. The silence that followed the demon nun's demise was shattered by an unexpected sight. The pool of holy water at her feet began to boil violently, and a thick, black, blood-colored liquid emerged from it, splattering around the room. The sight was both terrifying and otherworldly, and Father Bennett could only watch in awe as the blood-colored liquid oozed towards the demon nun's lifeless body. As the liquid enveloped the demon nun, it seemed to consume her, and with a final surge, it pulled her into the center of the pool. The pool then vanished, leaving behind only a faint smell of sulfur and the echo of the demon's final scream. Father Bennett stood there, exhausted but triumphant, knowing that he had won a hard-fought victory for God. But as he surveyed the church, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. What do you think will happen to Father Bennett? Will he live to fight another day? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates.